Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with what the head of the United Nations calls a moment of peril for the world. The U.S. Secretary of State says he believes Russia will invade Ukraine before the night is over. Ukraine has declared a state of emergency. The head of the military signed a conscription order calling up reservists between the ages of 18 and 60. And late tonight, Ukraine's president addressed the nation. He says he tried to call Vladimir Putin today, and all he got was silence. Then, in Russian, he appealed directly to the Russian people to stop Putin before it's too late.
А дальше по-русски. Сегодня я инициировал телефонный разговор.
Volodymyr Zelensky said war will take guarantees away from everyone. Nobody will have security guarantees anymore, he said. Who will suffer most of all? People. Who doesn't want that to happen more than anyone? People. Who can stop that? People. It was an impassioned bid to save his country. The Kremlin says the leaders of two breakaway areas in Ukraine have requested protection from Ukrainian forces, and there are fears a war on the edge of Europe is imminent. Jackson Prosco begins our coverage tonight.
Russia's relentless buildup has reached a critical stage. The U.S. believes 80% of troops are in forward position. Aircraft and ships are at the ready. All signs of an imminent, full-scale attack.
We believe that they are now at a state of readiness where they could attack at any time.
Overnight, smoke rose from the Russian embassy in Kyiv as diplomats were ordered out of the country. More weapons and ammunition from Canada and European allies arrived, and Ukraine declared a state of emergency, activating its military reserves and calling up volunteers. I'm not that young anymore, but I will join them if needed, said this 66-year-old librarian. Ukraine's president said his next steps would be decided by Russia's next move. Soon after, Ukrainian government websites faced yet another cyber attack. I have a bad feeling, says this resident of Luhansk. I feel the burden in my soul. In the regions held by Russia-backed separatists, there are preparations to seize control of more territory. Men are being conscripted to fight against Ukraine.
This is President Putin's war of choice. If he chooses to escalate further, Russia and Russia alone will bear full responsibility for what is to come.
At the UN, more condemnation of Russia was mixed with warnings that war will bring a massive refugee crisis to Europe.
If the conflict in Ukraine expands, the world could see a scale and severity of need unseen for many years.
Yet there appear to be few options left to deter Moscow. Sanctions haven't brought Russia back from the brink. What happens next is up to Putin. Tonight, the Kremlin claims that rebel leaders in Luhansk and Donetsk have requested Russian military assistance to repel what they claim is Ukrainian military aggression. Donna, this is one of those potential pretexts for an invasion, the type of thing the Pentagon says signals that potential Russian action could be hours, not days away.
All right, Jackson Prosco in Washington, thanks. The prospect of war in Eastern Europe could unleash a humanitarian crisis with a flood of refugees from Ukraine. As neighboring countries prepare for that, hundreds of Canadians have chosen to stay in Ukraine despite repeated calls for them to leave. Mike Armstrong reports on their family and friends who are anxiously watching events unfold.
How much time are you spending online?
A lot.
Between following the news and keeping in touch with loved ones, Anna Pluhater barely puts down her phone. She and her husband moved to Canada nearly 20 years ago and left behind hundreds of friends and family members in Ukraine.
It's heart-wrenching. It's to see what's going on and feel kind of powerless that I cannot do anything. I cannot just, bring them into safety.
Pluhater says her loved ones in Ukraine seem to almost pretend nothing's going on. They're scared and worried, she says, but are trying to go on with their lives.
You kind of have to hang on to some kind of normality.
It is nerve-wracking.
Pluhater's husband is worrying about his parents. They live in eastern Ukraine, about 50 kilometers from the front line. He's asked them to leave.
They're listening. They're getting ready. They're prepared to move if needs be, but I think they're in a state of denial that such thing can potentially happen this time around.
Across Canada, the Ukrainian community is nervous. There are rallies and protests planned in several cities. More than 1 million Canadians have Ukrainian heritage.
Regardless of when your family came to Canada, there's a very strong relationship and link to Ukraine. It's almost surreal.
What that's meant is people like this New Brunswick travel agent worry about their loved ones every waking hour. That after 2 years worrying about how they're doing in the pandemic.
It's not enough of COVID right now because of craziness of president. There is war, aggression, and it's sad.
Now, not knowing what Putin's end goal might be means there's no way to predict what happens next. The message people send to their friends and family members tends to be a simple but heartfelt, "We are thinking of you." Mike Armstrong, Global News, Ottawa.
We got a glimpse of Vladimir Putin's mindset on Monday in that long address he gave to the nation. His narrative moved well beyond recognition of the independence of two states within Ukraine. And there was a telling moment during his meeting with Russia's Security Council. Watch how Putin treats his own head of foreign intelligence.
Значит, в противном случае вы предлагаете начать переговорный процесс?
Нет, я...
Или признавать суверенитет их.
А я
говорите прямо.
Я поддержу предложение о признании...
Поддержу или поддерживаю? Говорите прямо, Сергей.
Поддерживаю предложение...
Так и скажите, да или нет.
Да. Поддерживаю предложение о вхождении Донецкой и Луганской народных республик в состав Российской Федерации.
Да, мы об этом не говорим, мы этого не обсуждаем. Мы говорим о признании их независимости или нет.
Да, я поддерживаю предложение о признании независимости.
Хорошо, пожалуйста, садитесь. Спасибо. Владимир Александрович.
After that, Putin delivered his speech announcing Russia was recognizing Donetsk and Luhansk as independent states and said he was sending in troops. Eric Sorensen looks at what Putin's endgame might be.
Russia's war of persuasion starts at home. Fireworks. And Russian flags in the region now recognized as not Ukraine. The pro-Russian accounts on state television. And justification from President Putin himself that Ukraine isn't a real country. Modern Ukraine was entirely created by Russia, says Putin, an integral part of our history. Historical ties go back centuries, cultural, economic, religious, political. Putin's version allows Ukraine's national boundaries to be erased, rationalized in part by the Russian ethnicity of many people in Ukraine.
He doesn't see Ukraine as being a separate nation from Russia.
Ethnically, Ukraine is 78% Ukrainian and just 17% Russian. But in Donetsk and Luhansk, deemed independent by Moscow, the Russian ethnic makeup is almost 40%. And Crimea, already taken by Russia, close to 60%.
That's one of his arguments, that the eastern part of Ukraine has more Russian speakers.
Then what does it mean for countries like Latvia? 26% of the population has Russian ethnicity, more than Ukraine. And Estonia, 25% are Russian by background. But those countries have membership in NATO, a protection that Ukraine does not have.
There is a difference, of course, of being NATO member and not being NATO member, as Ukraine shows.
Ukraine is surrounded by Russian might. And while Putin's vision may sell to many Russians, to most of the world, Ukrainians are not Russians. This is our land, said President Zelensky. We will not give anything to anybody.
It seems extremely costly to invade Ukraine in a major way.
Lisa Sundstrom thinks Putin is likely to destabilize the Ukrainian government rather than overthrow it. But Putin's rhetoric suggests Russia's historical destiny is at stake.
Putin is trying to reestablish, as much as is feasible for Russia, control over areas of former Soviet territory.
However Putin views Russia's historic entitlement, a broader invasion of Ukraine would spark a terrible conflict. And it's not clear even patriotic Russians want that.